It gives me a chance to put my stuff in the chat again. All right.
Okay, so I'll talk about pre-writing and what it is and give you a little background on an assignment I'm actually working on in my class right now. So there are lots of different pre-writing strategies that students can use, such as brainstorming, clustering, but and I tell them they can do these things, but I actually provide them with graphic organizers that they can see and visualize before they actually begin a writing assignment. And the pre-writing that they do is part of their grade. So it's something that I require them to do before they even start writing an essay, because the biggest problem in essay writing as well, how do I start? And this gives them a starting point to think about what they're doing and to organize their ideas so they have a roadmap for writing their essay. And I will have different organizers for different types of essays. So what we're doing right now is a narrative essay, and we have been reading in class the narrative of Frederick Douglass, and they're writing their own personal narrative based on, I gave them like 5 themes that they could focus on, like, for example, write about, an experience you had with your own education, for example, and they have to develop characters. They have to, use figurative language, for example, in this essay. So what I'm going to do now is just show you the organizer so you can, see how they begin their pre-writing and actually structuring their essay. So I haven't done this before, so I think I need to click share screen. So let me do that. And let me, I'm trying to get to my desktop. That's where it's at. Aha, there it is. Got it.
Awesome.
Okay, so can you see that all right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Is it big enough? Oops, hang on. So this is an assignment. Let me bring it, I had it. Okay, so this is the beginning of the pre-writing, and this is a template, and you can kind of see, how they need to complete it. Like they have to come up with some characters. So in the first box, they would write down who their characters are going to be, in this writing assignment, their personality traits, their motives, and so on. And then they have to talk about like where the story takes place. Was it like I had one student last term, his story took place in the Sierra Madre in Mexico, which I thought was really, really cool. And so they had to think about, where the story is taking place. And then they have to write down the sensory details, like, to set the scene. For example, if they're talking about their mother's cooking, for example, well, what did the kitchen smell like? What did the food taste like? What did the person see? And I always have them put dialogue in a story too to make the characters come alive. So this is a section where they can write their dialogue, conversation. And then I tell them that their story has to have a main point. They just can't write a random story. It's an important, what is the thesis? And right here, they have to write what the main point is, and what the purpose is. So they need to lay this all out before they even start writing. And then after they do that, I have a template for them to write their outline to actually or put a structure on it. So you can kind of see that, to where you know, they just have background information. And I think this is one of the most important parts to keep them going. And basically, why is this important to write about? And so this right here would be the beginning of their essay to get, you know, this is what would be in the first couple, 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then the rest right here would be the body. And this is just the rubric right here, which is a pre-writing. But I show them how, you know, their essay is going to be graded, what components they have to do, you know, to make a passing grade. So that's pretty much it for this assignment.
Awesome.
So
thank you. I have questions, but I'm sure other people do, but maybe
okay.
we should
All right.
pass
So
it.
stop. Do I need to keep this up anymore?
I don't think so. Should we have everyone go, or should we do questions at the end, or what's the best way to do it? Okay, maybe we'll have Christina go next, and then Kathy, and then ask questions. Does that make sense? Does that work? Because I'll probably ask a question that someone else is about to answer. Thank you, Portia. I got a thumbs up from Portia. So we're gonna follow Portia's lead. So Christina, are you gonna give us some info next?
Yeah, I'll give some info next, and I'll share my screen, and I am really going to make myself vulnerable and talk about a problem prompt that I wrote. I thought I had a great idea, and I wrote a prompt, and the students didn't do so well, and I was like, why didn't they do so well? This was a great idea. And I went and examined what I was asking them, and I wasn't clear. So I think what I am going to present is just a process of writing a prompt, and how sometimes students, they genuinely may not understand what we're communicating, and it's a lot more difficult, I think, when we're not in person to fill in. So here's what happened to me. So I'll share my screen. Can you all see it? Is it big enough? Let me make it.
Now I see it.
Okay. So I sometimes do a lot of research, like, you know, what is the problem with my prompt? So I went to the 4 C's, and that's an academic website for people who teach at community colleges, universities. And I found this acronym RAFT, and it says, you know, the role of the writer should be clear in the prompt. The student should know who the audience is, and what is the format, and what is the task. And so you'll see in a few minutes that my problem was I wasn't clear on the task. And so I always like to, when I'm designing an assignment, think about the end in mind, discussions, everything, so that students can go back and look at their notes. And so I start with the end in mind. And then I also think about the task, and even considering all these tasks, when I'm writing the prompt out, I like to reiterate that when we're breaking down the prompt. But let me just show you this. So here's where I kind of messed up. I said, is the part of it, is my question clear? How many questions am I really asking, and is that fair? And if I'm grading students on a thesis statement, the centralized idea for the paper, how can someone possibly combine all of my questions into a clear statement? So here's what I did. So our students read this one book for CRC, which is Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. So there's a section that's called I'm Here, and I know you all can read, but I'll just read this prompt. It says, and I'm here, Brian Stevenson explains, I still tried to meet the court's expectation of what a lawyer looked like, if only for the sake of my Clearly, Stevenson is meticulous about his appearance and demeanor, always maintaining professionalism. Students see that in the book and the text. So how do you imagine a lawyer to look, dress, and carry themselves? Now think about the following prompt and respond to it. How important is your appearance at work? Okay, so I confused the students. So they didn't know if they were supposed to write about how Brian Stevenson should look at work, or if I was talking about their appearance at work. So I got a couple of different responses. And what I was thinking is that, oh, in the introduction, they would talk about the text, and then the rest of the paper would talk about some themes about workplace appearance. So, but I wasn't clear. So I changed it using some of like my checklist, like asking myself, again, is that question clear? So I broke it up into two options. So basically I started with that quote, and then I said, what can readers conclude about about Stevenson's courtroom appearance and demeanor? So what can they so that they're just discussing Stevenson. And then another option was, this one's more reflective and personal, as it's a subtopic of journal. Option 2, since it focuses mainly on your experience, you do not have to include the text unless you want to compare your experiences to Stevenson. Essentially, don't force the text into your response if it doesn't flow logically, and to consider the following. And you can choose. So the topic is professional appearance, and then they get to choose one of these. How important is your appearance at your job? Explain. Or how do dress codes and policies about appearance impact employees? Or to create their own focused response to the topic. So anyway, I'm hoping that I'll get more focused responses to these choices now, because I didn't start off so clear, and this was my my bad, because I didn't really think about the tasks. So anyway, I'm just sharing my experience with you all, and I think sometimes we overwhelm, or we can overwhelm students with prompts or lack of clarity. So that's all I have for today.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I will refrain from commenting, but I have some thoughts. I'm going to pass it over to Kathy. I appreciate what everyone shared so far. Kathy, what do you have for us?
Okay, so I hate being last. Actually, why did I suggest that? Because now I have to go after Trudi and Christina with their great presentations and ideas. And I really love how the two of you have sort of addressed questions of, our expectations and how those can be clear or unclear to students. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to address a really different way in which this question of faculty instructor expectations work out for students in composition classes. I want to talk specifically about grammar and the whole notion of correctness, and how I like to work that into my college composition class. I put in the chat, I put the student learning outcome for English Writing 300 that most directly pertains to this question. Can everybody see that? The SLO is apply the conventions of standard written English, employing a variety of sentence structures and college level diction. And I think that SLO is potentially problematic in a lot of different ways that are completely relevant to our particular students. That whole notion of standard written English raises all kinds of questions for me about class, about race, who's standard. And these are questions that actually the National Council of Teachers of English have long recognized as being, worth addressing critically as teachers. And so I just wanted to share with you kind of how I approach this in my class. And hopefully some of what I say might be useful for all of you in disciplines outside English as well. So one persistent belief that students share, I've found over the years, and so far in my limited experience teaching incarcerated students, they are no different from any other students in this regard. So the misperception that I see is that good writing equates with good grammar, and that if their sentences are grammatically correct, they are good writers. And since they have been taught over the years, when their papers come back to them marked up with grammar errors that they've made, they are convinced that they are not good writers because they do not possess the tools to write good grammatical sentences. So one from a theoretical kind of standpoint, one thing I try to encourage students to believe, and I'm usually not very successful in this because, you know, there are years of experience in school, even for incarcerated students. You know, they spend a lot longer being told they don't have good grammar than one semester in college composition can, you know, overcome. But one thing I want them to think about is that academic writing and the conventions of standard written English, that's one style of writing among many other possible styles. And they are adding this particular style, the academic style of writing, to the tools they already possess for writing. And it's, for me, the key word in the SLO is apply. It's a rhetorical act. You're writing for this academic audience, so you're going to apply these particular conventions to your writing, and they're just one set of conventions. It's not hierarchical, that these are the only conventions, the best conventions. They're just the ones in use in the academy. That doesn't, you know, that doesn't address some of the very real issues of race and class that that we could think about, but it does address the, you know, the kind of this particular SLO. So, so first of all, I don't even talk about grammar at all. I really don't talk about grammar at all. I don't teach grammar in my college composition class. I see grammar and grammatical correctness as a function of proofreading for the students. And so I never even talk about it for pretty much the first month until it's time for them to revise a first essay. And I say, okay, now, you know, we're going to think about proofreading your work. And so I try to encourage them to apply 3 strategies. And I've actually put a couple of handouts in the chat as well. You should see something called proofreading strategies, and then the top 20 handout. So hopefully you can all see that. So the 3 kind of essential strategies for proofreading, I tell them are, okay, don't do this too soon. Like, there's no point in proofreading an early draft of your work. Like, you might take this whole sentence out. So why are you worried about spelling now? Who cares? So don't do this too soon. Wait until you're really far along. And I actually give them a homework assignment. And that's what the proofreading strategies is, the homework assignment that my students are using this semester. But I've done this before over the years. I tell them, I'm going to mark your work very minimally for grammar, but I'll mark a few things. Those are the things I'd like you to proofread. And so to do that, you need to read your work aloud, because you can catch so many errors by reading your work aloud. Even without me, you can do that. And then finally, get to know your own pattern of error. Like, you didn't come to this thing like with no knowledge of language. Actually, I should say that what I'm telling you here is not applicable for students who really are language learners. For those students, you need a trained ESL instructor to teach students who are still acquiring English as a language. This is for students, and so far as I can tell, every student in my class at Folsom is in this category of student. They're already fluent speakers of English, even those for whom it's a second language. They've told me this is my second language. They're nevertheless fluent in English. They're capable of writing correct sentences. They do write correct sentences. They just might not know how to describe them grammatically. So they don't really know what their pattern of error is. They just know, oh, I'm terrible at this. So here I rely on the research done by Andrea Lunsford, who used to be the director of writing at the writing program at Stanford. And her research involves analyzing not what students do wrong, but what instructors are marking. Like, okay, what do college instructors typically mark up in college student papers? And so she's got this list of 20 common errors, marked errors, I say in scare quotes, that instructors typically mark. And so I tell students about this research. I say, look, you don't have to worry. You don't have to learn all of grammar to do this. So your college professors probably are marking some of these errors in your work. These are their little pet peeves, you know? So just get to know, like, what's being marked in your work. You don't have to proofread for all 20 of these things. You don't do all 20 of these things. You probably do like between 3 and 5 of them kind of habitually. So I'm going to mark those and you're going to proofread for those. And that's it. That's kind of it. So I found that to be pretty effective in helping students at least get over the feeling that, okay, I don't know anything about grammar and therefore I cannot write. At least I'm hoping that by the end of the semester, they'll kind of not let that particular fear shut them down anymore as writers. Okay. So sorry, I probably went way over my 5 minutes that I was supposed to.
I don't think
that's
so.
me.
I think each of you, actually, we started late and so I think each of you did a great job. You all illustrated so much good stuff. I'm not sure what questions are out there. I just want to kind of like summarize some of the themes that I saw. So one, I talk a lot in various circles that I'm in about this concept of reflective practice, of like something happened, you stop and reflect on it, you look inward about yourself as instructor, about your communication, about that before you just say the students are all wrong, why don't they do that? Right? And you all illustrate this process of reflective practice and refining and refining and refining on our side. So I think that that's awesome. I also see like the scaffolding that you all are doing, the real awareness and empathy to understand students' perspective, to integrate a cross-cultural perspective around the values we have about language and about writing. And I guess I said it before, but this positive asset-based or strength-based perspective as opposed to a deficit-based perspective on students. These are some of the major themes that I think are essential for us, especially when we're working cross-culturally and with students who have a complex relationship with formal education, which is what we see for our students who are incarcerated. So those are amazing themes. And I have a zillion questions as always, but I don't know if other people have questions or comments or things they would like. I saw that Teresa has in the chat that she would like a copy. So if
I'm trying to attach it. I'm looking for it on my desktop now.
So if you have that, that's great. You can also email it to me, and I have a couple recordings to send out to everybody. So I can also attach it when I send out the recordings. Okay. So questions? Alex, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Thank you very much for that presentation, and it sparked so many things in my head right now. Let me just ask the one that's sort of burning in my head right now to Kathy. I mean to anyone, but Kathy, because you were talking about this. How are we as graders? How do I grade a paper that's full of not only grammatical errors, but sentence structure errors and those things that, you know, that we would say are not 300 level writing. This isn't just, you know, for our prison or incarcerated students, but also our general students. I always struggle with this. How do I grade that? I mean, is there a point where I say, this is just not 300 level writing, so it's not acceptable, so therefore I can't pass this paper? Or do I grade on a different way? I've never been, you know, there's no teaching of this. When I came into teaching, nobody taught me how to grade. They just said, go and do it. And I kind of had to figure this out. How do I do this?
Well, I bet there's a lot of collective wisdom on this question. But approaching it from a composition perspective, I would say, first of all, if it's possible, allow your students to complete multiple drafts, because if they see a writing assignment, you're a history professor, correct? Yeah. So if, you know, they'll see your assignment, but they might not necessarily connect the idea that that Trudi and Christina and I are all trying to convey. Hey, you know what? You don't sit down and write your first draft and then hand that in. No, it's multiple drafts. They don't necessarily connect what we're teaching with their other classes. They think that's just those English professors. That's, you know, okay, whatever. But really, if you can kind of demystify that process for them and say, hey, you know what? It's going to take you several drafts to get to the end game of my assignment. And I understand that you're not going to be able to look at several drafts yourself the way I would do in a composition class. But if you can encourage them to do that, and then to apply, you know, the different steps that we've been talking about, the pre-writing that Trudi suggested, the analysis of the prompt that Christina's kind of suggesting is a good idea. If you can, and then, you know, proofreading after several drafts themselves, giving them strategies to do that, that could really be helpful to them. Like, at least tell them, you know what, you've got to work on this several passes before it will be, you know, ready to hand in to me. Read your work aloud. And if you can catch some errors, try to find them.
You know, I do that. I try to encourage them. I have no time to read multiple drafts or have them do it.
No,
because
that's a
a lot of my
problem.
students are turning in their work literally 3 minutes before the deadline.
Yeah.
And I know that because of the quality of writing. And I stress the Reading and Writing Center. I used to have a little contract that they would sign that if they don't want to sign up for the Reading and Writing Center, they're completely secure in their right. I mean, you know, just to kind of prompt them along and push them along. But I don't want to sound callous, but I don't have time to teach English and history. I have to teach history, and they have to write a lot. And I've always struggled with this. Like, how am I setting them up for failure? And I know that the way that you described, Kathy, there's all kinds of problems with those slows. But if I sent a student on to Sac State and they can't write in my course, and am I not setting them up for failure there too? That's my biggest worry and my biggest struggle. And I have to walk that fine line, and it drives me crazy because I don't know where that line is and how to walk it sometimes.
I agree with you, Alex. I really struggle sometimes with reading term papers that are difficult to read. So I grappled with this a lot for a number of years, and finally the kind of the litmus test that I came up for myself in psychology is if I really understand what the student is saying, I will instead not grade them on grammar, but grade them on the rubric for the that assignment. But I also have a grammar component in my grading rubric. So they lose a determined number of points if their grammar is not grammar. I call it mechanics of writing. So grammar, punctuation, style, tone of voice, all of that. So they lose a chunk, but they can see exactly what number of points they missed because of their grammar. And so they're not going to get full credit. But if I can't read the paper and I can't understand them, then they start losing points in other areas of the rubric. Did you adhere to the assignment? Did you cite your resources? So there, there's like 5 domains. So that's sort of where I went with it. But I really struggle with students who they leave my class with a good grade because their term paper is only a part of their grade, not being able to write at a college level. And I agonize over this because, like you, Alex, I do not like to grade grammar, punctuation, stuff like that. After 2 years of writing, you know, the period goes inside of the quotation mark. I finally said, I'm done with that. And so what I do is I just say, you need to, if you haven't written a term paper that you felt really confident about, you need to visit the writing lab, and you need to have a native speaker review your paper. And so just trying to give a lot of advice that everyone already knows about to the students. But so that's been sort of my workaround for it, but it hurts my heart because but then the other thing I do is, if students want to turn in their paper way early, like 4 weeks before it's due, I will grade it for grammar and punctuation. The problem is I found that 9 out of 10 students don't even look at my write-ups on their paper. They just submit the same paper. And so I started a policy where if you do submit it and I spend an hour proofreading your paper and you don't make any changes, then you fail the paper. So that's sort of what I did. And that may not work for everybody, but I don't like people going into my discipline not being able to write well. First of all, they may not do well in grad school. So even though they might understand the basics of the discipline, if they can't write, they're just going to do poorly. So that's always on the back of my mind.
Kathy?
Thank you.
Did you
Well, so
do you have something?
these are all good ideas. I would say don't be too worried about the idea that you're sending students on to four-year schools and setting them up for failure, because honestly, remember that instructors at Sac State are very accustomed to seeing exactly the kinds of writing that they aren't suddenly different students at Sac State. It's a very similar student population. They are aware and they are not blaming you or even me. Some of the things though that we're talking about, some of the resources that we're talking about wouldn't be available, I don't think, to our incarcerated students. There's no writing center. I'm not even sure. Oh, I remember that one of my students on his revision plan suggested he would show it to somebody else if he could, if that was okay with me, for him to show his paper to somebody else for proofreading, to which I replied, well, that I don't mind if you do that, but I would really rather see you think about revising the big, I call them the higher order concerns. If you have a thesis, a paper where everything is, if you don't have a thesis, a paper where everything is spelled correctly isn't going to be a passing paper. So I do like this idea of awarding a percentage of points for grammar, but not having it be like the bulk of the grade being centered in, you're absolutely right, Veronica. This is not really grammar. What we're talking about is really not grammar. To study grammar, you have to be a linguistics professor, right? I mean, we're talking about sentence mechanics, and those things are very variable. Like I would say things like the period inside the quotation marks, that's very, if the paper were written in Europe, it would be exactly the opposite. The period goes out. So it's not, those things are very culturally conditioned. Grammar's descriptive, not prescriptive. Things differ from culture to culture. I'm not sure it's worth, in other words, worrying too much about errors like that. It's much more worthwhile to worry about, can I understand this sentence? If I cannot understand the sentence, then then no, I can't pass this. It needs to go back. But if there's any possibility to give students a second chance on a paper that you just can't understand what is being said, then maybe do that.
You know, for prep students, it's much different because they don't even have the access to the resources. I mean, most of my students they don't even have a dictionary. I don't grade anything down on misspellings, grammar, I just strictly grade content on, you know, at that point. I was just kind of thinking about students on campus too, in addition to prep. But yeah, thank you guys for all of your wonderful insights.
Hi, everyone. I just have a couple of comments on this. One is that completely agree with all of these issues and the approach and the concern. I have struggled with the same thing, Alex, that you described. This week I had a paper that was clearly, you know, big chunks of it were copied right out of the textbook with no attribution. And I know this is going on more than I catch. I mean, I just can't, unless it really jumps out at me, because, you know, I mean, a student can write, you know, his language and then all of a sudden he's got a vocabulary of a PhD. Nah, I don't think so. Those things jump out, but a lot of times it's not as clear. Where a plagiarism checker would get it electronically, I don't, because I've got to type it out, run it through to make sure that it is plagiarized, and then, you know, find the source, and then, you know, challenge the student on showing him that he wrote exactly what the book said, which is, I mean, for, you know, 90 students, that's just not possible from a physical standpoint. So that's one thing. But I think we all have an obligation to get our students to take these steps. I mean, take notes while you read, take notes while you watch these videos, write an outline, which is really a big thing in terms of getting your thoughts in order. Write a drafting. I mean, what an idea. What a fond hope that a student would do drafts. I mean, I know for sure these are stream of consciousness. I can tell because of the way that the narrative rolls. And so, Alex, I really feel your pain there. I have about 22% of my rubric is grammar. And the rest of it is, I'd say 56%, 60% is content. I want to see if they get it, I can tell they get it. If they read it, I can tell they read it, and they get full credit for that. And then I like to have my papers formatted in a certain way. And I like to, because then then I can step through the grading process a little more easily. So they get points off for formatting. If they're single spaced, written from end to the paper to the end of the paper and written on both sides, I mean, it's just this dense mass of handwriting that's impossible to interpret. So, you know, double space, good margins, right on the single side, give me a header, give me your name on each page. That's helpful because sometimes these pages get mixed up and you've got to put them back together again. I mean, this is such elementary things, but it's discipline in terms of your obligations as a student, I guess I would say. So yeah, but this whole plagiarism thing is really bugging me because I know that there's way more of it going on, and I really am I really want to lobby for getting technology in for our students. I mean, when I heard that the bachelor's program from Sac State or wherever it is, they get laptops or tablets or something like that, I am the poor me. I mean, where do we fit in all this? I mean, how come we can't have that? I mean, that's really something. But
when I see you on Thursday, I will tell you how that conversation went with the Department of Corrections on Friday. They got that feedback. So I will give you more details about that.
That's really great, Kalinda. I listen, and I know that you and Mari are fighting the battle for us. I mean, don't ever think that I'm not.
Oh, I don't think you
fully
think that. I just wanted to
confident.
let you know it went full circle.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can give you more details.
Right.
I say Christina and Kathy, I think, and then Teresa also wanted to say something.
Sure.
I just have a question about the plagiarism. I am noticing some answers that I'm getting to that seem to be more direct response from the book that I wouldn't necessarily see on ground with students on campus. So I was thinking about that, and I'm like, I wonder if, that has something to do with sort of an accountability, like, well, it says, and I don't want to be wrong, and I can find, it says right here. And so I was thinking about that, if they're doing that, because on my assignment for this week, I put use your own words, and we're going over MLA this week too. And so I wonder if it's so much of like, because of their environmental setting and accountability, if that's why they're doing that. And you're in business and some others are in the sciences, and those are like hard definitions and theories. And if the question is, what is, so-and-so's theory, and they say, oh, well, the theory is here, I'm just going to write that down. I don't know, I'm wondering if that is also, because I notice it only happens when I ask a what question, not so much a how or a why question. So
I give them a half a dozen handouts on APA formatting. There's there's even a graphic on how to paraphrase, how to quote, what the syntax of the text citations are, what the expectations are, what the difference is between your words, paraphrasing, and direct quotations, and how to work that into a paper. I mean, I give them all of this stuff, and there's a video on it. I mean, it isn't that they don't know.
It's super hard. It's super hard to do that task. We think of summarizing. There are about 5 different literacy tasks involved with putting a complex idea that is somebody else's idea into your own words. I actually separate that whole thing initially as part of my scaffolding into a summary. So they're summarizing, and that's where they're practicing this whole skill of, okay, I have to understand this idea. I have to attribute the idea. I have to put it into my own words. I have to document it. That's like so much that we're asking them to do. And I tell them, you're not going to get this right off the bat. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. I just want you to try it. So summarize this. And then I say, okay, no, this is like too close to the original. Like this is, even though you put this into your own words, you still have to cite it, but it takes them the whole semester, and maybe even then they don't get it. So I don't know, one idea would be to, if you have like assignments that come before the paper that they're actually writing, if they can summarize some of these sources and you can point out to them, okay, you know what, not acceptable. Because it's one thing for them to, they all know I'm not supposed to plagiarize, but to actually avoid plagiarism is super difficult.
I think it is too, because especially like if I say, what is this theory? And here's a whole paragraph that says it, and I want to make sure I get it right. I feel like students are they just want to be right. And
just
so
want to be right. They just want to be right. One quick additional idea for, like, I know you all cannot read multiple drafts. You've got to teach your subject. You can't teach composition. But another thought is, if you ask them to do some free writing and then write a couple of drafts, you don't have to read those, right? Just give them credit for doing them and ask them to attach them to their revision. They get points for doing them. You don't have to read them. Peter Elbow, who's a famous composition theorist, said, graded writing should sit in a sea of ungraded writing. So you don't have to read everything they write.
So one of the things that I wanted to just share is that I can totally relate to some of the things that Alex brought up, right? Because it's important, you know, to know what the expectations of academic writing are, right? So I get often students who say, well, Miss Duran, like, I can only write in block writing. No, bless you, Alex. But it's like, you know, you don't, okay, but you have to understand that block writing isn't acceptable in academic writing because, you know, as a professor, you have to understand that, you know, block writing is all capital letters, right? So, you know, I think that one of the things that I've been doing is, say I have a paper that's worth 50 points. 10 points is worth grammar, spelling, formatting, turning it in on time, right? So that 20% of the 50, right, or whatever, the 10%, whatever, the 20%, it's not just grammar and punctuation and spelling. It also includes, you know, are you on time? You know, is it formatted right, etc. And I think that I'm trying to move to this place of, you know, communicating the expectations of academic writing. But I totally agree that it's more important for a student to be able to communicate a concept in their own words, and also to be able to tie together some of those things that Trudi so eloquently like laid out on her pre-writing thing, you know, plan, which is, you know, the way that you tell a story is, you know, tell me what that feels like. Tell me what it looks like. Tell me what it smells like. Tell me what the texture of it is, right? And so that's super important, especially with our prep students, because so many of our prep students are so traumatized that when you ask them to express a feeling, which as many of you know, in social work human services, there's a lot of that going on. Like, they're like, okay, I was mad. Like, that's it. That's all. The rest of it's shut down. And, you know, this whole part of writing being a therapeutic process is super important for, especially for our prep students, but then also being able to kind of dive into that conversation in their writing and those feelings and be able to come out of them so that they're not kind of this raw emotion going back to, you know, the cell environment, which is a whole nother concept of, you know, being careful about what we're asking our students who are living in a traumatized environment daily to do. So that's one piece. The other piece about this whole concept of plagiarism is almost in all, even in my reading guides, I'm saying, in your own words. Explain it to me. If you had to explain this to somebody else in your own words, how would you explain it, right? And I think that, you know, many of our students in prep got their high school diploma through the GED in prison education. And if many of us are seeing people coming out of traditional public high schools with 7th and 8th grade capacity, truly, and graduating, what is happening in prison education, right? I mean, let's be realistic about the skill set that our students have. And sometimes we have to teach in a deeper level, even if it's just reminding them on an assignment, remember, this is what plagiarism looks like, right? Because I found when I teach college success in that environment, many, you know, we could spend a whole class time talking about what plagiarism looks like.
Yes.
Like the whole concept of plagiarism of your own work, right? Like, okay, I'm going to turn this paper in over here and that and the same paper in over there. Like, you have to have permission to do that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, you know, that concept was really hard for a lot of students to capture when we first talked about it. So, I mean, I think it's important for us to take time to do that, but also to help students understand that I'm not so sure that that's the most important part, right? I mean, I'm not a comp teacher, right? Because I'm teaching in social work, and I'm like, I need you to get to your stuff, right? And you don't get to your stuff by saying I'm mad. You get to your stuff by saying, you know what, like, my emotions are bubbling to the point where I can't breathe. That's your stuff. So, and for me, that's the most powerful when somebody's writing.
Actually, that's really great writing, Teresa. Like right there, from I'm mad to my emotions are bubbling up so much that I can't breathe. That's great.
But that's the part I want somebody to get to. And what I typically get is, I was mad.
So can everyone has said amazing things, and actually I don't know, I want to make sure that people, if they need to go, they can go. I'm incredibly interested in a few things. Is one, I would love some graphic organizers for pre-writing that would help me with more academic content. So if you have some of those, like the narrative stuff is awesome, but I realize that even though I require outlines, the pre-writing piece would be so helpful for them and for me to see where they're thinking. And I can hold people accountable for that time-wise without having to go in depth with grading it. And then I see the effect on the final draft, which is what Kathy was talking about. The other thing that's coming to me is that one of the things that we're really talking about here is how we scaffold student learning. And if you all go back to Bloom's taxonomy, it's one way to think about this, is that sometimes we want students to be really high up on their critical thinking, but they don't really understand or can compare and contrast the information or can apply it, and so much less do this big critical analysis of it, right? And so I think that what I heard Kathy and Christina and Trudi demonstrate and say is that sometimes we think something as easy as paraphrasing is just the student just isn't doing it, or the final draft is a mess. It may not be as simple as they just didn't give us what we wanted. It might be that there's a lot of steps that we can put in there to help them get to where we would like them to be. I'm also much more fascinated I'm very fascinated with this tension. There's a couple tensions in the room. One of the tension is our own expectations of writing versus what students really need. And I think we have to be real about that, which is where I feel like Christina's example was really a good one about thinking about ourselves. And this tension exists about, like, am I prepared? What is the purpose of a community college general education course? I would love it if we were broadly having that conversation, because I get that the system is trying to tell us that our entire purpose is to get them to transfer. And I think that's a bunch of bullshit based on capitalistic business models for education. So I could go on about that. The other tension is about the cultural context of what we're talking about, right? The way that race and class and educational privilege, we don't barely ever talk about that, play into our decisions and our expectations and our grading. So this has brought a ton of complex stuff up, and maybe we can continue it into, like, I'm not sure always how to organize these meetings, but maybe we can just pick up on this and the stuff with educational trauma in the coming weeks. I'm just wondering if Trudi, Kathy, or Christina have any final words before I stop the recording, and then I would love to chat more either now or later, once I stop the recording. So Trudi, Kathy, Christina, any final things?
I just learned something, or I'm reminded of it by working with professors who teach English language learners, who are also in some of the other English 300, 301, 302, that it takes about 7 years to acquire a language. And even native English speakers, sometimes our K through 12, they're not being taught the formal mechanics of English language. So even those native English speakers may not have those mechanics. And again, it takes years. And I'm saying, including myself, a lot of us probably were memorizing Robert Frost. We were memorizing poetry because memorization was learning when we were in school. So we're diagramming sentences and sentence trees. I have made an effort as a parent to fill out inter district changes to get my daughters into certain schools here in Sacramento. And none of them have done sentence trees and diagramming sentences the way I did. That English class for me wasn't an analysis and reflection. English for me, when I was in school, was grammar and punctuation and those mechanics. So we've changed what we do through K through 12, and we, I think, are measuring students by maybe how we were taught. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying that there's a shift in priority from when we were in school, which doesn't say that, you know, that component isn't part of academic writing and writing that's published. So, you know, there is some tension and some struggle and some different expectations.
Yeah, totally agree. The whole question of language acquisition, you know, the ability to write is the last stage of language acquisition, and it's super difficult. And we need to take all of these things that Christina has mentioned into account, I think, not just with students on the main campuses, definitely with the incarcerated student population.
You know, I think that I would totally agree with that. And the other piece, going back to what Kalinda said about, you know, the whole kind of educational trauma and the privilege, right? So like, at the same time, I grew up with, you know, somebody correcting my grammar all the time, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, checking my homework, correcting all that, etc. And, you know, I learned working in the research world in the research center at UC Davis that a lot of the work that I did there was working in the Spanish speaking population. And when you did informed consent, even though I could read and write and speak Spanish, the majority of the people that I worked with who immigrated here, they didn't even, 90% of the population did not get past second grade. And you know, you don't really learn to read fluently in any language until about third grade, right? So, I mean, that's a whole nother inequity in just a certain group of people that potentially could be impacted. So, I mean, that's the other thing that, you know, occurs to me in this conversation. And I don't know the answer to that. I just, you know, I'm just saying.
More questions and answers. Trudy, you got the final word before I stop the recording.
Yeah, I think like one of the problems, and this, you know, also applies to my mainstream courses, is that it's really difficult to make up for a very poor K-12 education, you know, especially like, you know, these students that I have at CRC, they come in from, you know, all different high schools. They've had 40 students in, you know, in a class. I mean, how can they really learn grammar and how to write when the teachers have been overwhelmed? And so this problem just trickles, you know, it comes to us because they haven't learned, you know, they haven't really had their papers, you know, evaluated. I mean, I certainly didn't have any of mine, you know, evaluated when I was in high school, you know, or my writing evaluated. And I think that's part of the issue too. How do you make up for that kind of academic loss from, you know, K to 12? And I think especially 9 to 12 when they're supposed to be really learning some of these skills.
Yes. and we have tons of questions. And I'm remembering, I think what Kathy said earlier, I wrote it down, is how do we add to the tools that they already have? And I also want to say, how do we access the tools that they already have? And I think that is really, I think sometimes we get so frustrated, but I do believe that sometimes we're not sure why we're doing what we're doing. We just did it because someone did it when we were in school. And sometimes I'm not sure that we know, we get our eye on the big picture of what the purpose of a GE course is, or what the purpose of a discipline specific course is. So I have tons more questions. I'm going to end the recording there, but I have like lots of thoughts. Trudy, did I cut you off? Did you have a final thing?
No, I just had one more thing in my in my mainstream classes. I asked them, well, what did you learn in high school about writing? What did you learn? And what do you want to learn here? What do you think, you know, you need to learn while you're here during this time? And I found that kind of questioning them helpful.
Accessing their what's motivation.
Yeah, because some said, like, I've never written a research paper before.
Yeah.
Even though they've been in high school. And in high school, I never did.
Right.
You know, I went to college, you know, not knowing how to write a research paper.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end with one last thing, and then I have lots of questions if people have time. If not, I totally understand. But one of the things I think that we really are wrestling with a lot is motivation in education. And I think that we often think the problem is students don't care, but I've never met a student who said, I don't want to write well. I've met lots of students who said they don't know how to write well. And I think that that's an important frame for us to remember, right? Is how do we match their motivation? And that is a question that I think we can continue to be thinking about as we learn to answer some of these hard questions ourselves. So thanks, everybody. And we're going to continue this conversation.